Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Kirsten, and this video is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be more like a podcast style where I share my thoughts on how traveling has affected my viewpoint and ideas about food. So I'm going to be sharing some thoughts and also just sharing a bunch of pictures of food that I've had around the world, food that I've made myself. So if you want to consume this video by watching all my food pictures, you can, but if you need to do something and like put away your groceries or something like that, then you can just sit back and listen. So before I get into the actual content, I do want to introduce myself if you're new here or if you just want to get a reminder about who I am. My name, I think I said this before, is Kirsten, and I am a freelance writer. I'm also a coach. I'm a multidimensional person, and I feel like my mission in life is to help people to think differently, to expand who they are. And I do that through videos like this on YouTube, through my freelance writing, and through coaching. So if you feel like this video has affected you in some way, shape, or form, if you like the content, if you like the food pictures, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And with that, let's get into it. Okay, Reflections with Kirsten. I want to talk about food. If you follow me on Instagram, you probably know that I really like food. I often take pictures of my food, because I think that food is art. Food is life, it's nutrition, it's where we get energy, and there's even been research showing how eating certain foods affects our mood and behaviors. Food is important, duh. But it also is so much more than that. So much more than just what we eat and consume. Maybe my love language is food, but I know that culturally speaking, food has a way of bringing people together. Sometimes food is how people express love. Cooking, preparing food, even the way that food grows teaches us patience. It teaches us the value of, giving something our attention and work and love. Because when you do those things, when you give your attention to the food, it rewards you by tasting really good. And those experiences and those tastes with food create memories. So anyways, I was listening to How Not to Travel podcast, and it was talking about wet markets. And when I travel, I love going to wet markets. I love going to like wet markets or outdoor markets, open air markets, markets where you go and there is the food laid out right in front of you. Not wrapped in plastic, not in boxes, literally from farm to whatever table is at the market. And I love going for the aesthetics alone. I love just going into a market and seeing all the different types of colors from different vegetables and different fruits just laid out so elegantly. It's like you're walking into an edible art gallery. I love the busyness of markets. I love that, like, when I go, I feel like I'm actually seeing real life. I feel like because I'm going where all the locals go to buy their food or sell their food. It can be overwhelming depending on the market, and I have yet to visit some of the bigger markets like in Thailand and China. But I've visited many markets in Colombia, Mexico, even California. I go to the farmers market, and here in Spain as well. So listening to the podcast, I was very surprised. I first learned that why it's called wet markets, and it's because the floors are usually consistently wet because they are constantly cleaning them. And I was very unpleasantly surprised to find out how much discrimination a lot of wet markets, especially in China, have been receiving since COVID, thinking that wet markets are dirty and carry diseases and transport diseases, which, when you really think about it, is kind of illogical, because mostly what happens is people pick up the food from the farm and then they bring it to the market, and it's sold usually that day. Oh, and I forgot to mention that one reason that I love shopping at wet markets or farmers markets is the prices, one, and you can just get a lot of food for very little money, and two, I know that my money is going directly to the person that I bought from, or someone in their family, or someone close to them. It's a way to support the local economy and often try new foods or new fruits or new vegetables that I've never tried before. So, because of the whole COVID situation, a lot of misinformation, there's been a lot of pushback on wet markets, but they're so vital and important. Versus industrial, what do they call them? Like industrial food companies, foods that manufacture, package their food and send them into very far places. And I could be wrong. I have to go back and check the podcast, and I encourage you to listen to this podcast too. But in the podcast about wet markets from How Not to Travel, it said that industrial food companies only really serve like 30% of the population. Only 30%. So most of our food actually comes from wet markets, or most of the population is fed, I should say, by wet markets. It's a livelihood. It is everything. And it's just a better way. Most the food that you receive in a wet market usually is not going to be pumped with hormones so that it has a longer shelf life. It's literally, they picked the right fruit, they picked the right vegetables, and they brought it to the table, brought it to the market. I remember walking into the market in Colombia. I cannot remember the name of it right now, but I'll write it in the notes when I remember later. But I loved when I walked in, there was this woman sitting at the entrance of the market with like these bowls of just fish. And she would sit there and she would cut the fish open and kind of fillet it out, so you can see the quality of the fish. And it was just so funny just to see, it's right there, it's open. And maybe you might think that, like, okay, is that sanitary? And the point is, in which I think, the way that it should be with food is that when you see that fish there, you buy that fish and you cook it that night and you eat it that night. There isn't this like hoarding or preserving of food for a long time as if we're going to run out of food. I think there's so many aspects of food that we take for granted, and there's so many aspects of food that I want to speak about in the future. I'm not really sure how exactly, but I think just even pure understanding of exactly where our food comes from. And I still am always baffled by the severity of hunger in this world. And there's so much food. There's so much food in the world. I don't really think that the problem with hunger, and there's a book that I want to read called Hunger that goes into depth about this topic. But from my understanding, and probably a very limited understanding, there's so much food that is being produced. There's so much food in the world. So I don't think it's about quantity. I think it's about access. I feel like a lot of people are suffering hunger because, one, they don't have access to food, or the food is, and meaning two, either they don't live in an area where they can access the food, or where they live is the prices of food are just very high, unnecessarily high. And then that also goes into the other aspect of food waste. Of like, how much food do we waste every day, every week, every month? Because we think of it, we don't really think about it. We're not conscious of what we eat. We just kind of consume because we know that our bodies need food. So we just consume food, but we're not really eating food. That makes sense. So one thing I love about living abroad is that I've learned to cook a lot more. Like, I'll go to the market, I'll get my fresh vegetables and fruits. I'll try some new spices. But it really makes me really appreciate food in a different way than I have before. So if you're listening to this, I challenge you to try to look at food differently. Maybe asking yourself where you're getting the food, maybe looking at the origin of food. Are you purchasing your food in places that are sustainable and support the environment? When you're finishing your food, when you're eating your food, are you throwing away half of the food on your plate? Or are you trying to consume everything? Look at how the food comes to you. Is it coming to you in plastic packages? I invite you, and as I invite myself, as I start to interact more with food, to really look at food differently, to treat it differently, to respect it differently, and remember that whatever you just ate, you're lucky to have eaten that. It's a privilege to have eaten whatever you have eaten, even if you didn't like it, even if it wasn't the best tasting food. Remember that it's a privilege. And also remember that whatever you put in your body affects you physically, mentally, and emotionally. Thanks for listening.